John Bolton is former Trump's national security advisor, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome to our program, Ambassador Bolton.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
U.S. President Donald Trump had a phone call with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. However, Putin did not agree to a ceasefire. He just proposed to continue so-called endless negotiations with the Ukrainians. From your perspective, is Vladimir Putin overplaying his hand right now?
Well, I think there was a possibility he might have been overplaying his hand before the call, but I think we can see from the outcome of the call that Putin got exactly what he wanted. He wanted a one-on-one conversation with Trump, perhaps in an actual meeting, but in a phone call turned out to be enough. No Volodymyr Zelensky on the call, no Europeans on the call, just Trump and Putin. Putin obviously didn't give any ground in terms of a ceasefire, and Trump accepted it. He didn't threaten sanctions. Yuri Ushakov, a Putin advisor, former ambassador to the U.S., told Russian reporters that they were having such a good conversation at the end of 2 hours, neither one wanted to get off the call. I mean, you can believe that or not, but it's intended, I think, to show that that Putin has Trump right where he wants him, meaning no ceasefire and Russian military activity continues.
From your perspective, has Donald Trump been played by Putin again in this phone call?
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, Putin has been successful at manipulating Trump since Trump's first term. He's shown clear evidence since Trump's inauguration in January to his second term that he's been able to get from him what he wants, despite earlier threats from some of Trump's advisors that he would use carrots and sticks against Russia, including threats to continue or increase the supply of military assistance to Ukraine or to impose new sanctions on Russia. Neither of those things has happened. No indication either of those things will happen now. So Putin's strategy, which is get on a conversation or meeting alone with Trump, he's tried that before and succeeded, and I believe he's succeeded again.
From your perspective, do you feel that Vladimir Putin would like to continue this war for a while? According to Bloomberg, he is confident that he is winning this war, and he's confident that his army will be able to capture the 4 Ukrainian regions, even those parts which are not controlled by the Russian army. How do you see, what are the main reasons of such unrealistic objectives of the Kremlin over the Russian army?
Well, there's a theory among close Russian observers in Europe and the United States that war actually is beneficial to Putin. It helps him maintain control in Russia because Russia has been very successful at avoiding or mitigating EU and American sanctions. The actual effects of the war are still not really felt directly by the Russian population. And I do think it's clear that the Russians think the military momentum is on their side, although the gains that they're achieving are very small, achieved slowly and at a very high cost. I think Putin believes that continued pressure on the Ukrainian government may cause some European leaders to back away from their apparent commitment. And it is the case that Putin, whether he believes time is on Russia's side or not, he is still committed to what he started to do in 2005, which is recreate the Russian Empire. So from his perspective, even a ceasefire would only be a temporary cessation. And it's one reason Ukraine has been justified in asking for security guarantees, because even if military hostilities stop tomorrow, that's a long way from the end of the Russian threat.
Let's also cover Trump's national security team. Do you feel that Trump's national security advisors also understand that he's being played by Vladimir Putin, he's being manipulated by the Russian dictator, or are they just afraid of telling him the truth?
Well, I think it's probably some combination of that. Maybe Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is telling him the truth, but there are others who listen to influencers like Tucker Carlson and Laura Loomer, who might as well be in the employ of the Kremlin. Nobody really knows for sure, but their views are certainly quite strange and very favorable to Russia. And that seems to be the direction that Trump continues to follow.
How can you see the possible outcomes of these negotiations, high-stake negotiations between Trump and Vladimir Putin? Because it seems like Trump has to show some kind of results after putting so much efforts in that, so much political efforts in this war, in solving this war.
Well, it's certainly the case that after saying during the campaign last year that he would just get Zelensky and Putin in a room and solve it in 24 hours, that manifestly hasn't happened now today, the fourth month since the inauguration. My guess is that Trump calculates that he will suffer minimum political damage with the failure of the ceasefire. Many in the U.S. would automatically blame it on Putin. And the real question remains, will Trump continue or perhaps even increase the supply of military assistance to Ukraine? It's one thing to walk away from the ceasefire talks. It's another thing to walk away from the assistance. Trump hasn't said anything definitively one way or the other. Hopefully Congress, which still contains many members very supportive of Ukraine, will appropriate some more funds and Trump won't stand in their way.
And also, do you feel that Trump's national security team is trying to persuade him to allow Ukraine to receive weapons from the United States, to continue military support for Ukraine?
I think they're divided internally within the administration. My guess is that Rubio does support additional assistance. But again, Vice President Vance has said as far back as the 2022 Senate campaign in Ohio, when he was elected, he didn't really care what happened in Ukraine. And that's obviously a very dangerous attitude to be that close to the president.
You just mentioned about the J.D. Vance. Recently he said, quote, "Putin doesn't seem to quite know how to get out of the war." Is he right?
No, I think Putin knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't want to get out of the war. I could see a lot of reasons why Russians might say, you know, we need a ceasefire. Our army has been chewed up. Much of our Black Sea fleet is now on the floor of the Black Sea, thanks to Ukraine. Maybe we can get out of some of these economic sanctions and actually make much more money on our sales of international oil. All of that, to me, would argue from Russia's own point of view that they should want a ceasefire. But if those arguments are being made internally at the Kremlin, they obviously have not yet persuaded Putin. So if he's doing what he wants, he may be right or wrong from Russia's point of view, but I think Putin at this point thinks he's on the course that he should be on.
Also, during negotiations last week in Istanbul, Russia has made unrealistic demands to the Ukrainian delegation. They demanded from Ukraine to withdraw its troops from 4 Ukrainian regions which are not fully occupied by the Russian side. From your perspective, is there any chance that Russia could make a compromise? Do you see this as a starting point for negotiations, or Russia's position which will not be changed?
I think the Kremlin knows they're not going to have that demand met, that the best they can do in the near term on a ceasefire is something along the existing battlefront, that you freeze the forces in place, that becomes the ceasefire line. So I suspect that making this more extravagant claim on all 4 of the provinces that they think should be Russian, that it's for domestic political purposes in Russia, but also to be used as a bargaining chip to get something else. I think what Putin is also interested in is redeployment of some NATO forces on Russia's flanks, maybe from the Baltics, maybe from Eastern Europe countries, NATO members. I don't think he should get that either, and I doubt that he will. But in his mind, the redeployment of NATO forces is important because it affects Russia's defensive posture. We see reports even today in the United States of buildup along the border with Finland. So I think Putin's got the big picture in mind here, again, from his perspective in Moscow, as part of this exercise to try and recreate the Russian Empire.
Do you expect any kind of a breakthrough in negotiations until the end of this year? And do you expect Trump to reach a ceasefire deal, to have any kind of success in that?
My best prediction at this point is Trump's going to back away from trying to negotiate a ceasefire. Perhaps something could change, a dramatic, unexpected development on the battlefield, or a decision by Trump to cease weapons assistance and other military assistance to Ukraine, which I think would be a huge mistake. But I think from Ukraine's perspective, that the government should be talking with European members of NATO against the contingency that Trump guts off support, to see if the Europeans can live up to their rhetoric and make up for any downturn.
If Donald Trump walks away from negotiations, from your perspective, will the US continue to provide Ukraine with military aid?
Well, I certainly hope so. And as I mentioned, I do think there's considerable support to continue, or in some cases increase, the military aid in Congress. We just want to be sure Trump doesn't veto it or doesn't encourage opponents of the military aid to be more active. If he simply says he'll continue the status quo in terms of weapons and ammunition and other military assistance, that would be satisfactory. It still means I think the Europeans are going to have to do more through the period through December 31st.
Also, do you expect U.S. Congress to impose sanctions on the Russian economy on its own? Because U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that Republican senators and also Democratic senators are ready to make this decision on sanctions against Russian economy, but on their own, despite the position of the White House. And my question is, why on their own? They should do this on their own, but without the decision from the White House, without the support from the White House. Why does Trump hesitate to put pressure on Putin?
Look, he sees Putin as his friend. That's hard to explain, I know, but Trump thinks that if he has a good relationship, a friendship with a foreign leader, then the U.S. has good relations with that country. That's vastly oversimplified, but that's what he thinks, and he thinks he and Putin are friends. I don't believe that's how Putin sees the relationship, but Trump has given no indication, at least in the roughly 24 hours since his call with Putin, that he favors more sanctions. And my guess is if he called Lindsey Graham and said, don't proceed with this legislation, that Graham would back away. I think it's helpful to have it out there. Certainly it's something that Putin can't ignore as long as the legislation is pending. I'd be surprised if it moved forward quickly. Among other things, we're engaged in a huge domestic battle in Congress over the fiscal budget for the federal government. It's enormously complicated, and I don't think that there'll be much attention paid, certainly in the House or even the Senate, until we get this out of the way, probably within the next 30 days.
Just mentioned about the friendship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. What are the main reasons of this friendship, special relations, so-called special relations between Trump and Putin?
Well, it's a good question. I think in large part it's because Putin has so manipulated Trump based on his prior KGB career that Trump actually thinks they are friends. Trump has this fascination with authoritarian figures. He thinks he's friends with Xi Jinping of China, with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. When they first met in Singapore, Trump said about Kim Jong-un, we fell in love. That's not how Kim Jong-un sees it, but this is how Trump can get wrapped up in his perceptions, which I think are incorrect, but which allow these authoritarian leaders to take advantage of him.
And he just being played by those authoritarian leaders during negotiations.
Yes, I think that's exactly what Putin has been doing to him since the inauguration.
And do you think that Marco Rubio or other members of Trump's national security team were present during phone calls between Trump and Putin?
I don't know. Normally, it's the practice that the national security advisor is on all calls with foreign leaders the president takes. Rubio is now holding both jobs as national security advisor and secretary of state. So he should have been on the call. I don't know that the White House has indicated one way or the other whether he was.
Let's also cover Putin's regime and recent recent article from the Washington Post. According to the Washington Post interviews with Russian military commanders and Russian soldiers, most of the Russian soldiers today would be not satisfied with a peaceful settlement of the war unless Russia occupies 4 Ukrainian regions fully. What is your take on that, and does it mean that Putin is afraid of ending his war without achieving maximalist objectives?
Well, I think it's a reflection of 3+ years of Russian propaganda. I mean, in the West, many people talk about this as Putin's war, but I think it would be a mistake to ignore that Putin and his advisors in the Kremlin reflect a considerable body of Russian opinion. And over the past 35 years, they've convinced a lot of Russians that the breakup of the Soviet Union was a Western plot, and that Putin's effort to recreate the Russian Empire as he sees it is part of a war against the West. So if you've convinced people that that's actually what happened in history, these attitudes by the Russian soldiers make sense in that light. It happens to be wrong, but that's all they've heard for the past decade or so because of Putin's control over news and information inside Russia.
Also, there is an interesting debate among some analysts that if Putin accepts ceasefire deal on not really pro-Russian terms, on normal terms, then his regime could be endangered. His soldiers or other mercenaries could topple his regime. What is your take on this possibility?
Well, I don't see that at the moment. I think that's a useful thing for Putin to say to outsiders to justify his very tough position. But at this point, Russia isn't a government in a conventional sense of the word. It's like a criminal gang. And certainly the security forces, if they turned on whoever the leader was, that could end that leader's tenure in office. But I think Putin has mastered the levers of power inside the Kremlin, and I don't see him as threatened in the foreseeable future.
And also, according to the Washington Post, there is a big concern in Kremlin about the Russian soldiers who could go home after possible ceasefire deal and could endanger Putin's regime because of their violent nature and other, for example, psychological problems after participating in the war. What is your opinion on that?
Well, there may be some danger of that. We've seen some indications of dissatisfaction in the military, the incidents with the Wagner gang and Prigozhin, but people have also seen how Putin deals with dissent inside Russia. So I think while it may be possible, I'd again say I think that's unlikely as a real threat to Putin's power.
And what do you expect from Russian regime, from Putin in the upcoming months? What is your prediction on next Russia's decisions, the next steps over Ukraine?
I think the best prediction you can make is that he will simply step up the pressure, hope for a breakthrough somewhere. They certainly haven't demonstrated any creative strategy since the original invasion, which failed on a number of fronts because of Ukrainian resistance. So despite the enormous human and material cost of the way the Russians conduct the war, my best guess is we'll just see more of the same.
And many military analysts believe that Russian army cannot fully occupy 4 Ukrainian regions. They can't cross the Dnieper River, capture the city of Kherson, the city of Zaporizhia. If Putin fails to achieve his maximalist objectives until the end of this year, would he be more positive toward reaching a ceasefire deal, for example, next year with Trump's administration?
Well, tomorrow is another day. Who knows? Next year it's possible, but I think at this point Putin is optimistic. I think unrealistically so, but that's why he wants to continue the battle. And I think now, after yesterday's phone call with Trump, I think he has a free hand, at least from Trump's point of view.
But do you see a ceasefire deal as a first possible outcome of this war? Do you see this as Putin's next objectives after after trying to capture more Ukrainian land. Could he consider this option?
Well, if he gets substantially more land, which is why I don't think the ceasefire is actually in Ukraine's interest. I don't think you want to be negotiating while the Russian troops are moving forward, however slowly it is. And yet that seems to be where we are on the battlefield today.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Well, thanks very much for having me.